to the 531st Board meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I would like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. On my far left is Carmen Ramirez of Atwater. Between Carmen and myself is Jenny Lester Moffett of Davis. On my far right is Bob Schneider from Davis. We have the Davis contingent here this morning. And between Bob and myself is Sandra Moraz of Alpa. My name is Carl Longley, and I hail from the grand and glorious city of Fresno. And is Tam here? She will be here later, I suspect. Tam Dudek will be joining us this morning, we believe. There she is. A great interest.
She was probably waiting outside until you called her name.
I know, waiting for the entrance. And I'll now introduce Pamela Creedon, the Executive Officer, who introduced her staff.
Good morning, Chairman Longley, members of the board. Across the room to my left is Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office. Next to Ken is David Coop, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. And next to David is Alex Mara, Staff Counsel for the board. To my to my immediate left is Karen Lanfranchi Rizzardi, Executive Assistant for the board. Sorry, I haven't seemed to improve my language pattern. And to my right is Andrew Altavogt, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office. In the audience, we have Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer in our Redding office, and Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office. And I believe Richard Lunkarvich is here, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and we have a number of staff in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This morning, we are going to go next to agenda item 17, meeting procedures. I'll read that briefly. Well, I'll read that now, and then in order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda and are available here at the staff table upon request, and are posted on the board's website and are summarized on the computer screens that you're looking at during our breaks. And any questions or comments regarding these procedures may direct it to Kirano Lanfranchi Rizzardi, our administrative assistant. Are there any board member communications? I'd like to come back to that item 19 after we finish with 15. Public forum. Is anybody here for the public forum? Oh, yeah, we'll do it.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you very much. I wanted to give you a quick update on the actions on the DO, TMBL, and the Stockton Deepwater Ship Channel. As you recall, 3 years ago, there were 5 parties: the San Joaquin River Group Authority, who I represent. Again, my name is Dennis Westcott. San Joaquin Tributaries Authority, the San Joaquin Tributaries Authority, the State Water Contractors, the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, the San Joaquin Valley Drainage Authority, and the Port of Stockton signed an agreement to operate the aerator in the Deepwater Ship Channel to avoid any DO sags. And it's worked extremely well over that 3-year period. The agreement was set to expire on the 1st of June, but there is a provision in the agreement that it can be extended, and all of the parties have agreed to extend that through the 2014 year because of the fact that we are in a drought, and likely that aerator is going to be very critical in this year. So all of the parties will continue through 2014. We wanted to let you know that.
Dennis, before you go on,
yeah.
So if we had a better water year, we would still experience that DO sag there, wouldn't we?
We probably would, and we would probably extend the agreement anyway. But the importance of the agreement.
I guess what concerns me is this agreement seems to be an on-off thing, and
well, I guess it comes back to how well are we doing, and how often are we having to use that thing. And last year was a fairly dry year. Just the whole year was very dry, and the fall was very warm. And we only used the DO aerator 23 days, and that was all in September. And luckily, we were looking at maintaining the objective at 6, even though the national objective is 5. We never went below the 5. We had some SAGs that went to 5.8, 5.6, but we never went below that 5. And it's operating extremely well. And part of that credit goes to the board in working with the city of Stockton to improve their wastewater treatment plant. And since that improvement has gone online, it has been very efficient at maintaining the DO by operating the aerator. But we still have things to do, and we talked about those during the triennial review process. We need to look at that objective of 6 because we're pumping a lot of oxygen in to maintain it artificially high on what was supposed to be a trigger mechanism for developing the upstream barrier. And also, we need to bring the other parties in the river basin into the agreement. And again, we're committed to do that. I know that you're committed to do that, and we look forward to working with you in the next year or so and getting that accomplished.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any questions from board members? I might point out that Dennis spent many, many years here on the staff, and he introduced me to that wonderful topic of salt. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak in front of the board? And we'll go to the executive officer's report after item 15, but we'll go now to the uncontested calendar. This is the time and place for a public hearing to consider adoption of uncontested items 29 and 33. And I've been reminded before we do this item, Sandra, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you. I apologize for the delay. This is a time and place for a public hearing to consider adoption of uncontested items 21 through 33, including MPDS permits and time schedules. 29 through 33, yes. Waste discharge requirements and cease and desist orders, rescissions and enforcement orders, change of name and ownership, and other business. Does anyone wish to discuss any of these items? 29 through 33. Are there any late revisions?
Yeah, there are late revisions to items 30, A, B, and C. They all have the same revision, which is removing the requirement for diuron sampling, and that's in the table at the back of them. And then
Andrew, I need to remind you to tell the reporter who you are.
yes, sorry, Andrew Altavogt, Assistant Executive Officer.
You're like me, you're trying to push the time.
And then also on item 30, and I believe you have this in front of you, there's a change regarding the UV transmittance requirement on there as well. Those are the late revisions.
Good, thank you. Any discussion, questions regarding late revisions? Yes, go ahead, Carmen.
This is just kind of a standard question on all late revisions. I would appreciate it if staff, when talking about late revisions, would make the affirmative representation that these parties have been advised of the change and that they are in agreement. So is that the case here?
Yes, that is the case.
Good point. Thank you very much, Andrew. We'll then go ahead and close the hearing, and I'm open for a motion and a second. This will be a roll call vote.
I'll make a motion that we
Carmen's
adopt.
moved. Do I have a second? Jenny has seconded. Call the roll.
Ms. Ramirez? Ms. Miraz? Mr. Schneider? Ms. Moffett? Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. We'll now go back to item 15, which was continued from yesterday.
And Dr. Longley, Since we have a new court reporter today, if any of the parties are going to address the board, if they could introduce themselves prior to doing so.
Say again, please. I'm sorry.
Since we have a new court reporter that was different from yesterday, and if any of the parties are going to address the board, if they could reintroduce
certainly.
themselves for the
Right,
record.
right. Thank you very much. Your name?
For the record, Alex Mayer, staff counsel. I've already introduced myself to the court reporter, and that's how I know this information. Thank you.
So, Mr. Duffy, go ahead.
Good morning, Dr. Longley and members of the board. Appearing for Lank-Richfield Company today are William Duffy and Andrea Wong of the law firm of Davis, Graham, and Stubbs in Denver, Colorado. And with us today at council table is James Bruin of Farella, Braun, and Martell in San Francisco.
Mr. Duffy, I know it's been a late night probably for you, but we need to have you move closer to the microphone.
Thank you. I don't have any opening comments other than it was a late night, thank you. Ms. Wong is going to, I believe, respond to comments. We're assuming that there's going to be more presentation of information by counsel, Mr. Coop. Is that how we're going to proceed this morning?
Well, yes. The hearing was closed. I'll go ahead and reopen it if you have anything new to introduce, and very specifically on the one ruling that I made yesterday. If you have something new to present on that, we will consider that. And that's, of course, the ruling on the exhibits that I kept out of the record.
Thank you. Good morning. Andrea Wong for Davis, Graham, and Stubbs. I was able to research that issue, and I can update the board on that. We'd also like the opportunity, when it's convenient for the board, to make a few comments on a new draft CAO that Mr. Coop circulated last night. I know you have a full docket today, so I promise to limit my comments to about 3 minutes, but we would like the opportunity to make a brief record on that. Turning to the question of the exhibits, we were able to get in touch with our office last night, and we have confirmed that we inadvertently failed to include exhibits 263 to 293 in the board materials. I'd like to apologize for that. As I mentioned, it was inadvertent. Had we known of the error, we absolutely would have made every effort to get them to the board before this hearing. I understand that Mr. Torianen knew of this error on February 27th, but chose not to tell us about it. I would also just add that I don't believe that this error prejudices the prosecution team, as again, we did provide them to the prosecution team on February 27th. Mr. Torianen did not respond to that email to complain in any way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Duffy, as to your request to speak to the draft, that draft may not be what finally comes out. This board, I reopened the discussion. I had closed the hearing and had limited discussion to members of the board, and I will close it again, and we will see what comes out of that. You heard our discussion yesterday and probably have some idea of the direction that we're going. We have yet to kind of reach a final decision of where we're going to go, so I think it's premature at this point to allow discussion, and I'm not really sure that I'll entertain that idea anyway.
Okay, thank you. And one practical thing we would like to address, if the board wishes, is some of the deadlines in the draft. There's just some practical considerations that we would like just a moment to talk about whenever you're ready for that.
Okay, I'll consider that, but at this, I don't think we're ready. We're not at that point yet. And I'll close the hearing at this point and go back. At this point, we have a motion, and we were discussing that motion yesterday. And we really need to find out where this board is going. Bob had his motion on the table. It included both of the cleanup and abatement orders. He made other comments that I said that I supported. And but I said that I would like to see the order contain only the mine. And I'm not going to speak and Bob, you can obviously expand
Carl,
on that.
for the start of the day, I'd like to withdraw that motion.
Okay,
And begin afresh when we're all awake. And I would like to say a little preface, that it's my certainly we all know that ARCO is not directly as a company responsible for this. They purchased a company, Anaconda, and with that they purchased a lot of assets and they assumed liabilities. But there is, there's always this responsible party issue of the fact that the ARCO is the parent company here now, wasn't directly involved in the mining, but they did buy that asset of Anaconda. So I think it's important to recognize that the situation and frame it in that regard. So they have, the Anaconda they purchased because it has a lot of assets, but like I say, there's also these liabilities, and that's what we're dealing with today.
Thank you. And Jenny and Carmen, you had comments. Would you want to restate them, update us on where you are at this point?
You want me to go first? So I guess the comments that I had made yesterday were there were I guess a couple questions that the prosecution team had to answer, and I felt that that the prosecution team had that I was satisfied with the arguments that I heard yesterday on the prosecution team side, which was that there is certainly a water quality impact to the there is certainly a water quality impact coming from the mine and from the tailings into the streams and tributaries, and it does need to be addressed. And secondly, that it is very clear in the evidence that I saw that that there was a very direct communication and correlation between International, which was owned by Anaconda and now is owned by ARCO, and their involvement in disposing of those wastes and that are now causing the pollution. So those were just basically the comments that I had made yesterday that I felt that were very compelling, and that's it. And I do agree with the comment that Bob just made this morning, that ARCO purchased an asset that also has some liabilities, and this is apparently one of those liabilities. So thank you.
Carmen?
My comment relates to this case, but is more in general. And thinking about it took me back all the way to law school. And it was that it's important that, that responsible parties be identified. I agree. But there's also an important principle for business to be able to quantify their risk and be able to move forward. And statute of limitations in civil cases does that. But here we are arguing about something that happened almost 100 years ago. We're trying to piece things together. And even though I understand insurance archaeology and I know that is available sometimes, cases like this do trouble me. It's 100 years old. But having said that, I understand that it comes along with buying something, and but just so that I could get it out, it just seems, in principle, difficult to see that ARCO's moving along, doing well, and then you find out that a company that you bought way back when, did bad things way back then, and now you're on the hook here. So I do see that they are on the hook. I just, I don't know. I guess in some ways it just seems like it's been a long time.
Well, I would entertain a motion at this time.
Dr. Longley, if it pleases the board, we could certainly hand out copies of the suggested proposed revisions by the advisory team, and we could walk through those.
Well, let's see
if you'd like,
let's
and
see if we
also
have a
your
motion,
comment.
and then I think it'd be proper after we get a motion on the table.
Could you tell us where you are and why first, Carl?
I would like to see a motion on the, as I stated yesterday, I'd like to see a motion on the mine, the cleanup and abatement order to the mine, without prejudice any further future actions. I would prefer to see the tailing site be addressed by the actions which I understand are now underway by the Forest Service. Those actions, if they can reach a favorable conclusion when executed, certainly under CERCLA would address the tailing site, and at the same time, with this cleanup and abatement order, we could address the mine.
But the Forest Service is not here today. They weren't here yesterday. I'm just clarifying that they're still not here. Before we move forward in the direction that you're proposing, I would prefer to hear something from the Forest Service, that we have some sort of acknowledgement and agreement that that they understand that they are under the fire to continue moving forward in the CERCLA process.
We have the letter that was read into the record yesterday by Mr. Coop.
Right, it wasn't specifically read into the record, but it was specifically referenced, and I pulled out some specific information from that email that specifically says that the Forest Service is working on a focused feasibility study, which will result in either a new record of decision or an amended record of decision. The email, as I understand it, does recognize that there are continuing water quality problems out there, and that they're not waiting for the 5-year review process under CERCLA to amend the record of decision. And at least according to them, they believe that they will be working expeditiously in an effort to address the mine tailing site through, again, a revised document in consultation with other public agencies, including the regional board.
Carl, would this go forward in 2 motions, then 1 motion on the mine and 1 to somehow provide a marker that we're specifically not taking action at this point in time, but we hold up our options with respect to the tailing?
Certainly a motion on the CAO for the mine. Following up on the second one, would we want to do would we want to do a resolution?
I just want to
Right.
memorialize this.
That's right.
Well, Dr. Longley, what we tried to do in the revised, again, they're just only suggested findings for the board's consideration, is to make it clear in the revisions that the board was only acting as to the mine site itself. It wasn't taking any specific action as to the tailing site, but that it was reserving its authority, if needed, in the future to pursue necessary enforcement action as to the tailing site.
If you want
I have
something,
a copy
yeah,
of that.
yeah.
Can
Okay.
we get copies? of
Yeah,
that?
let's hand out the
And
copies
then
now.
let's-
If the board
Let's
is,
walk through it.
I was hesitant to have the copies handed out until we had a motion here, simply because it pertains specifically to the mine site.
Yeah, and I'm happy to make a motion with respect to the mine site, as long
Good.
as these suggested
Good.
changes can
Good. If that's the direction we're
memorialize
going,
this
let's
other.
go ahead and
And is this the draft CAO that council was talking about?
This is a version of the latest cleanup and abatement order that the prosecution team had circulated to the advisory team in response to a request that we'd made a couple of days ago. And in response to getting those Word versions, in anticipation of arguably or possibly having to make some changes to those orders, this version reflects the latest
Then
and greatest version.
we will work our way through this, and if we are going to adopt this, before we do adopt it, I'll honor ARCO's request and open up discussion specifically for timelines and timelines only.
Dr. Longley,
Pardon?
ARCO has seen this already?
Yeah.
Okay.
right, Dr. Longley, the order was sent out last night to the parties, I think about maybe 7:30 or so.
Okay.
You're certainly free to take whatever comment you may or may not want to take. My suggestion is there may be some benefit or value in giving the parties, at least a few minutes to make some specific comments on the proposed order, if that is the direction the board is inclined to go, given the fact that The revisions were circulated, I think, last night about
I will-
7:30.
I'll take your recommendations under advisement. Let's go through this now.
In response to the first change itself pertains to finding 4 on page 1. Again, that's an effort in the advisory team's mind to more closely align the language of the finding consistent with the Supreme Court decision in U.S. versus Best Foods. The finding in page 8 and is an effort that you'll see later on in the order to make a distinction between the Walker mine site itself, which is the subject of this cleanup and abatement order, and the tailing site itself. There's the last sentence in finding 8 is not highlighted on your draft because you don't have a color draft, but it was highlighted to the parties, and I have the benefit of a color copy. But that last sentence was highlighted because quite frankly, we weren't sure what direction the board wanted to take in this regard. So if the board is inclined to only consider the adoption of a mine site cleanup and abatement order, then my suggestion would be to strike the last sentence in finding 8. Moving on to page 6 of the proposed order. This is in response to a comment that Atlantic Richfield had made in response to the order, and we made a change accordingly in response to that request, specific request that Atlantic Richfield had made in finding 33 on page 6. Moving to the bottom of page 6, finding 36. Again, that's additional language to create a finding that we at least think is a bit more in line with the U.S. Supreme Court precedent, United States versus Best Foods. And we struck the specific reference to substantial evidence, as Mr. Mayor pointed out to me in response, excuse me, to pre-hearing motion number 6 that you ruled on yesterday pertaining to the evidentiary burden. The next suggested finding, 36, moves on to page 37, where we've added some additional language to specifically point out evidence in the record that would support Anaconda International's control over the pollution-related activities at the site. 37 is just we feel like that the first sentence could be stricken. There's plenty of previous findings in that regard as to Anaconda International's pollution-causing activities at the mine. And in particular, it makes a specific reference, it appears to make a specific reference to the mine tailing site, and we want to make clear that we're trying to adopt an order here, in this case, specific to the mine itself. Moving on to finding 39, minor change, but I think I'm not sure if the board necessarily wants to hamstring itself into the position of saying that it absolutely will develop a TMDL for Dolly Creek and Little Grizzly Creek by 2020. We certainly plan or endeavor to do so, so we made just a suggested wordsmithing change in that regard. Just a typo in finding 42. And I'm going to ask Mr. Mayor to speak quickly in relationship to finding 51, and then I'll pick it up after that point.
Finding 51 is suggested in response to ARCO's argument in its opening brief, I believe it is, regarding a particular section in the cleanup and abatement statute regarding acts that took place prior to enactment of the cleanup and abatement law, and cites that provision word for word, focusing on the idea that the abatement, the statute does not apply according to the terms of this provision if the acts were not in violation of existing laws or regulations at the time they occurred, since most of the alleged activities took place prior to the 40s, or certainly prior to 1981, there's a need to establish the applicability of this 13304 code section for the proposed action. And so there was information in the prosecution team's rebuttal brief alleging that a condition of pollution, or a condition of public nuisance existed during the time that these acts were taking place, or shortly thereafter. And this paragraph points back to a finding that's already in the order, and talks about evidence regarding a 10-mile eradication of fish life downstream of the mine that is reported in the evidence. There's a Trumbull report that talks about this in detail, and this finding links that evidence with the case law existing at the time regarding public nuisances, and that destruction of fish property, interference with the property of the state, is in fact was considered a public nuisance at the time that these acts occurred. Therefore, with the finding that there was a public nuisance around the time of these acts, that this finding would establish the applicability of Water Code Section 13304 to be able to go back in time prior to 1981.
Thank you.
Moving on to finding 52, there's a suggested revision to strike the change to restore the affected waters to, quote, background conditions, i.e. the water quality that existed before mining activities began. You'll see that same language reflected in task number 4 on page 11. And the reason why the prosecution team has made, that the advisory team has made the suggested change, it sounds like the order does cite the pertinent law that's appropriate for purposes of conducting a cleanup pursuant to 9249, but 9249 doesn't necessarily require a cleanup to background conditions. Certainly the presumption in 9249 is to clean up to background, but as referenced in earlier findings in the order specifically recognizes that if there's a demonstration made that it's technologically and economically infeasible to clean up to background, that some level greater than background may be permissible as long as it fully protects the beneficial uses. So moving on from finding 52, we'll go to finding 54 on page 10. Finding 54 on page 10 addresses the pre-hearing motion that ARCO had raised, the defense of latches, and it's an effort to recognize that the equitable doctrine of latches generally does not apply, particularly in cases involving where the operation of latches, number one, is an equitable court-based remedy, and that its operation doesn't apply when it would nullify an important policy adopted for the benefit of the public. And we make some specific findings in regard as to why we think that an important public policy would be nullified by the operation of latches in this case. We also make an additional finding that even evaluating, for the sake of argument, that ARCO arguably may have been prejudiced for the purposes of latches, which that's a decision for you to make, which is why this is a suggested finding. The finding recognizes that the boards balance the equities in this case and finds that the strong public policy for environmental protection outweighs any alleged or purported prejudice that ARCO may have incurred. Moving on to page 11, we struck the last sentence in finding 7, making a specific, finding 57 on page 11, I'm not sure if the board would entirely know what it would be doing if it was specifically incorporating all the findings in the response to comments by reference. So we struck that language as a suggestion. We fixed a typo. Moving to the bottom of page 11, task 4. Again, this is just is the same suggested change that I made, that was made earlier, pertaining to restoring the affected waters themselves. That it isn't necessarily mean that cleanup has to be the background under 9249. We're almost done. Moving on to page 13, finding 11. We struck this language. It says, responsibilities for the water quality problems associated with the mine and the Walker Mine acid mine drainage abatement project shall end when the mine no longer poses a threat to water quality. And, you know, we struck that language in part as a suggestion only because given how long it may take to remediate the site, there may be other appropriate regulatory or approaches that the board may decide to get involved with or take advantage of or avail itself of in the future pertaining to the mine site. For example, the board may decide to de-designate the uses as it pertains to the affected water bodies in light of the fact that the cleanup situation out there is so intractable that arguably it may never be fixed. But again, I think until the tasks are submitted in compliance with the order itself, I think it'd be premature for the board to make any evaluation determination about that at this time. And following up on the tasks issue, I don't pretend to be an engineer or scientist or spend a lot of time with work plans, but we did have a member of the advisory team just flag to your attention the fact that there may be some benefit or value in arguably changing some of the dates as currently proposed in the cleanup and abatement order. Again, that's the board's discretion, whatever they'd like to do in that regard, but we're just flagging that as something for their consideration. Finding 11 on page 13, this is my perhaps inelegant effort to try and make it clear that the order is specific to the Walker Mine site itself, not to the tailing site, and that it reserves the authority and puts everyone on notice that the order may be revised or another order may be issued as may be necessary to remediate conditions at the Walker Mine tailing site, but that we're not doing so at this particular time. And the last change is just to create a signature block for the Assistant Executive Officer as member of the advisory team instead of the head of the prosecution team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another item is Mr. Schneider pointed out that he believed, and I concur with his belief, that we need to send a strong message to the Forest Service that we are not forgetting about the mine tailing site, that we were expecting them to move expeditiously in finding a solution to that site. And my question to you is, how best can we document that?
Carl, in light of the suggested additional comment, number 11, that Mr. Coop put together for us, I think that does the memorializing that I was thinking about, but I think a letter from the executive officer, assistant executive officer to the Forest Service clarifying the decisions of the board would accomplish that goal.
Does council agree with that?
That's certainly a course of action that the board could take.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to follow up in response to some of the testimony that I believe I heard yesterday in that regard. It appears that the relationship between Forest Service staff, from what I heard, and regional board staff seems to be a fairly cooperative, well-working relationship. But what I heard is that there may be something higher up the food chain that may be an impediment or an obstacle for the, and I'm only speculating. Maybe it's the fact that they don't have, maybe it's a funding issue, maybe it's a staffing issue. I don't know what those concerns are, but I think that given what was mentioned yesterday, that the working relationship with staff appears to be good, I think a letter in this case from someone higher up the food chain would be useful.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your advice. With that said, I will open this back up for brief comments and, of course, follow up by the prosecution team. But I'll entertain your comments now. About how long do you believe your comments will take?
I'm sorry, Dr. Lang. Before we start, do you want to make a specific ruling on the exhibits, or do you want to wait on that until we get comment on the order itself?
I did not believe it was necessary to change my ruling on the exhibits. I
Thank
had
you.
already excluded
Thank you.
the exhibits
Thank you.
from the record, and it was stated that, in fact, what appeared to happen did happen.
Thank you.
So,
Just want to affirm that. Thank you.
Thank you.
In answer to your question, Dr. Longley, I think my comments will take fewer than 5 minutes.
Appreciate it. Go ahead.
Okay. First, a point of clarification. I'm concerned that there's some ambiguity in this order regarding past costs. As you've heard yesterday, the prosecution team has withdrawn its request for seeking reimbursement for past costs. Paragraph 26 discusses these past costs, but does not indicate that they're not seeking them here. And paragraphs 52 and 5 on page 12, so it's 5 in the tasks section, I think creates some ambiguity about whether past costs are recoverable. So I'd simply request that ambiguity be cleared up. Perhaps the easiest way to do that is to add a sentence at the end of paragraph 26, confirming that the board does not seek past costs from Atlantic Richfield here. So that's my first comment. We do have, just for the record, a number of objections to this corrective action order, and I understood from your comments before, Dr. Longley, that you would not like to hear those at this time, but only hear comments about timing. Is that correct?
Give you a couple more minutes to address other issues that you may deem appropriate.
Okay. And, you know, you've heard a lot of this yesterday, so I'll be very brief, and this is just really for the record. There are a number of statements in this order that we do not believe there was any factual evidence for. I know the board doesn't have time today for me to go into detail on that, but I will just refer you to Appendix 6 to Atlantic Richfield's February 20th submissions, which contains detailed comments on a previous iteration of this order, and most of those comments are still applicable. I will take the time to point out just two things about this order. One is that we believe it's defective and that it doesn't acknowledge the board's own liability. It doesn't address it or absolve the board of its own liabilities for the current remedy. And then lastly, I'll just say that we believe paragraph 11 is incorrect. This order, if issued, would still be a challenge to the CERCLA cleanup action because of the interconnection between the sites. So thank you for humoring me on that. I'll turn to the timing issues. As you know, and it's been discussed yesterday, Atlantic Richfield does have an opportunity for additional review of this order. We have an opportunity to appeal it to the state board. And we're also considering, given the interplay between this and the federal consent decree, seeking some advice from the federal judge on this, who entered that decree. For that review process to have meaning, we would like some of these deadlines extended. The first deadline is currently written, falls on May 30th. Given the tough caseload of all these tribunals, we really think it's very possible that that the State Water Board or the federal court really won't be able to address a motion to stay.
Excuse me, take me in this order too.
Okay,
Page
so the
12.
first deadline appears on page 11 under the tasks heading. And so-
Okay, great, go ahead.
yeah. So the very first deadline is May 30th. And so what we respectfully request is that this board extend all deadlines in here by 90 days. And we think that will be enough time to get on the docket for the state board or the federal court, if the case may be, to request a stay. And, you know, we think this is a very complex case that raises a number of important questions that we'd like reviewed. There's the application of U.S. Supreme Court precedent. There were serious questions of constitutional law. And as I alluded to before, there are implications for Atlantic Richfield's compliance with the federal consent decree. We do not want to put our client in a situation where complying with this order puts it in violation of a federal order, and we'd like to have a chance to get some guidance from the judge who signed the federal order on those issues. And for that reason, I respectfully request that you extend all deadlines by 90 days.
Thank you. Prosecution team.
Thank you, Dr. Longley. Andrew Tariainen of the Office of Enforcement for the prosecution team. We just have a few comments, just a couple minutes worth, and I'll take them in order as they appear. In paragraph 4, the new language aligning the finding with the best foods decision, I think it's appropriate to do that. I think it's also appropriate to add to that sentence, perhaps after the word waste in the first sentence of paragraph 4, the phrase specifically the discharge of mining waste, which ties also the finding to the water code. The same change would be requested for the first sentence of paragraph 36. And then one more comment regarding the findings in paragraph 36. There was evidence presented yesterday, and I believe board discussion regarding evidence that International Smelting and Refining Company was active on the site beginning in 1916 through 1918. I would recommend that we add a sentence at the end of paragraph 36 noting that International managed, directed, or conducted operations specifically related to the leakage or disposal of waste, specifically the discharge of mining waste, from approximately 1916 through 1918. And then the last comment, it's not a suggestion, it's just a comment to note that the language deleted from paragraph 10 of the order, which is on page 13, regarding the responsibilities continuing until the mine no longer poses a threat. I would just note for the record that that language comes from Title 27, Section 22510, but I'd also note that paragraph 2 of the order specifically requires compliance with Title 27, including Section 22510. So we're okay with the deletion, just with the recognition that the Title 27 requirements are already incorporated. And then as far as the...
So Mr. Anatarian, you aren't specifically recognizing, suggesting an alternative change in that regard?
Correct.
Thank you.
That's correct. Just noting for the record. The comment from ARCO regarding past costs, I think with the removal that the prosecution team did of specific reference to past costs, I think the order speaks for itself and it clearly does not seek past costs. And regarding timing, the prosecution team would oppose any request by ARCO for an extension of any of the deadlines. There is a process to request a stay on a petition to the state board, and we would suggest that ARCO can avail itself of that process, and there's no need for any extension or abeyance here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dr. Long, let me just add, we weren't really thinking of it, quite frankly, in terms of whether the board may be inclined to alter the dates based on what administrative or judicial challenges someone may want to pursue. It was more a function of it's the end of March and our first deadline is in May. I mean, we got a couple of months. That seems, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer. That just seems like a pretty
Tight.
quick period of time.
Well, but you are a lawyer. Do you think that that's enough time for somebody to seek a stay? And I just want advice to us. I mean,
Certainly, the regulations, as Mr. Torianen pointed out, provide an opportunity for an aggrieved party to seek a stay from the State Water Board. The practical reality is, given the State Board's workload, I don't know, I couldn't tell you one way or the other whether they'd be willing, how expeditiously they would be able to act in actually queuing up a request for a stay at a State Board hearing.
Nor how.
Mr. Coop, your time is up.
No, it isn't. Good. So, you know, I'm open to comments from the board on the requests that have been made to us. The first being from Ms. Wang on the 90 days, and then a number of comments by the prosecution pertaining to specifically to paragraphs 4 and 36, adding mining before the waste. I personally don't see a problem with that. Do you see any issues with that, counsel? Good.
I don't see any issues with the suggested language change that adds specifically the discharge of mining waste as referenced in a couple of findings as pointed out by the prosecution team. And certainly the board is inclined in its judgment if it wants to add an additional finding as it pertains to saying that the board isn't seeking past costs, but again, I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
Dr. Longley, I don't know that it's absolutely necessary, but I do think it's important for clarification. Because if we mention costs, there, you know, after we're long gone, someone could imply that the fact that we're mentioning costs, that there was.
I appreciate your comments. You want to tighten the record. Could you propose some language for us for a finding such as that?
First of all, I'd like to ask Atlantic Ridgefield if they have a suggestion in that regard.
We do. Let's see if I can find that page again. My suggestion is on page 5 on paragraph 26, which currently reads, since 1984, the Central Valley Water Board has spent more than $2.6 million on the Walker Mine acid mine drainage abatement project. Simply adding a second sentence, which is that the regional board does not seek reimbursement for these past costs or for any past costs against Atlantic Richfield. Let me just consult with my partner. Okay. So let me start again. That we add a second sentence saying that the regional board does not seek reimbursement for any past costs through the effective date of the order against Atlantic Richfield.
Do I have any comment from the prosecution team in that regard?
I would just add to the end of that sentence the phrase "through this order."
Is there a rejection?
I don't think I have all the language. I'm trying to piece together a couple of different pieces. So maybe someone can write it out and read it into the record, just so we're absolutely clear about what that finding is going to say.
Good. Looks like we're going to be acting on this document, so you got a short while to do it, and we get to the point of adopting the document. We will be going through each of the changes again, and if we could have that in writing, I agree with council, that would be a great benefit to us.
And Dr. Longley,
Yes.
as to the 90 days, I mean, I think it's clear that no one is going, Atlantic Ridgefield is not pretending that they're going to start work on this. I mean, really, the purpose of these dates, which we would hope would be to start cleanup, that's not going to happen. So if the purpose is to seek a stay, I don't know that there's going to be any prejudice in extending the deadline for 90 days. I know it's additional work for staff, but
Well, it's changing a number, and I do agree, we probably need to change, even if the stay requests are not before us. 30 May is awful close, and we probably need to change that date anyway. Is it 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or some other amount, I think is really the question.
well, I don't know, but I do recall there being testimony in other hearings about sometimes it takes a while to get an answer from either state board or even getting on the federal docket. So, I mean, I don't know. I think 90 days is, I don't have a preference, but, you know, I think somewhere between 30 and 90's extension is good for me.
Sandra, Bob, do you have?
I mean, I wouldn't just add 90 days to the existing dates, but I might make it 90 days from today. What is that? That adds 2 months, then 60 days?
Well, we could go, I think it's about the same thing as you're suggesting. We could go to 30 June then.
Yeah, so that's,
I don't know if 30
it makes
June's
it
on
a
a
total of
Sunday or-
90 days
Yeah,
until we begin implementation of this order.
we need to check the calendar. Would that satisfy you?
Yeah, I think additional 60 days to the May 30th deadline would be fine.
Well, we're talking 30 July then, 31 July.
And are we talking about just the first deadline or all deadlines?
I would suggest we hold that just to the first deadline. Some of the other deadlines are quite a ways off.
That's what I said. I mean, I was talking 90 days from now, which would be, what, the end of June? And
Yeah.
not 4 months.
Well, we do have some deadlines in June and in December of this year.
And we have to extend everything. I think
Okay.
that makes sense, but I think if we take it 90 days from now, that's more than enough.
So, April.
So if I'm hearing Mr. Schneider's suggestion correctly, then he's suggesting that we push out all the test deadlines that are listed. So the 30 May 2014 deadline, the 27 June 2014 deadline, the 31 December 2014 deadline, the 30 April 2015 deadline, the 30 June 2015 deadline, and finally the 31 December 2017 deadline. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I guess that's a 30-day extension and not a 90-day extension.
By 30 days, thank you.
Does that make sense? I mean, I think,
Good, let's close the hearing again, and I'll accept a motion at this point.
Did
I'll
we
make,
get-
does
Yeah,
somebody else you want to make?
Let's make sure that we've got the language buttoned up as to finding 26, if
Yeah,
that's the pleasure of the board.
I'd ask for written language.
Well, let's just make sure David's
I
comfortable.
have a
with it.
suggestion off the cuff in trying to understand each of the parties' respective requests, and I probably am not going to make either one of them happy, but I'll take a stab at it. And say that the board does not seek any reimbursement for past costs through this order. So it keeps the any, but it specifically limits it to the order itself. I don't think that's going to make either party necessarily 100% happy, but it certainly gives Atlantic Richfield a little breadth in that regard, and it certainly cabins it in for purposes of this order.
I like the language. I think we have agreement up here. Thank you. So, Bob,
I'll make the motion that we adopt this.
with the 30 June date.
Yeah,
and
with the late revisions, I'll
Right.
instead of our attorney's recommendations, I'll make that motion.
With 30 June, the other dates
All those late
adjusted in accordance with, as council was suggesting.
There
And-
was
Right. And with this last language that we just got.
Go ahead, Alex.
There was there was
that's
some
right.
additional language suggested by the prosecution
Right.
team for finding 36
Right.
regarding the time frame, approximately starting 1916 through 1918.
I'm okay with that.
And David is saying that he's okay with that. You can walk. You can talk now.
I'm not, my recall is I want to be clear on what the language was that was specifically suggested as read into the record in that
You know,
regard.
I'm not
But we
too
don't,
happy with that language.
okay, that's fine. That's
Unless
the board's
unless the
discretion.
board member wants to insert that language.
The 1916 date?
Yes.
This has to do with the, I believe it's international's involvement in managing or directing activities at the mine from approximately 1916 to 1918.
I think that's relevant.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that specifically spoke to me yesterday when we heard testimony.
Okay.
One thing that
Then what
we
would
did.
that language be?
It would be the last sentence of this revised section 36. And one other thought to keep in mind is that when the advisory team made our revisions, we did add the word, the qualifier approximately prior
saw
to
the
all
qualifier
references
as-
to
yeah.
1918.
Right.
So we were trying to account for the fact that this pre-1918 period of time there could have been control or of certain pollution control activities. I think the finding that is suggested by the prosecution team does provide more clarity to that issue. So
Okay.
if the board is inclined to add more clarity, then I would recommend doing
Do
so.
the board members understand that additional language?
Yeah, and I think that having the year is more accurate than saying approximately, so I would support insertion of the year 1916.
If the prosecution team could read that language one more time.
Sure, and specifically, it would be an additional sentence on top of the proposed changes and then our suggested change regarding discharge of mining waste in the first sentence. The last sentence, the new last sentence of the paragraph would read, international, managed, directed, or conducted operations specifically related to the leakage or disposal of mining waste from approximately 1916 through 1918.
Yes, Jenny, go ahead.
I'm just wondering why we would add that sentence down there and not just change the date from 1918 to 1916 up above. Is there a difference between international and Walker in the reference up above?
Why don't we direct the question to
Okay.
David? Yes.
I'm not sure about the need, quite frankly, for the additional I mean, it's an important question that Ms. Moffett raises, and I don't have a good answer right for you.
I
right
could
now.
take a stab at that. Perhaps the reason is that the prior, that paragraph 36, the first sentence talks about concurrent management between Anaconda International and Walker, whereas the contract that was noted yesterday is strictly between International and Walker. So perhaps there's a reason to, it's more accurate to include the last sentence just focusing on International and Walker during the time frame 1916 to 1918. And that is prior to the corporate ownership taking place that linked International to Anaconda.
I have one other
Yes.
suggestion, since this seems important to me.
Go ahead.
And there's another information item that's a half hour. I would suggest that we get a clean copy back for our vote. So
Good.
if we can just extend this until after that.
Okay, you've made the motion. Do I have a second on the motion?
You want a clean copy so that
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to see the changes that we talked about.
I think I want a clean copy.
Or you want a clean copy or a corrected copy?
I want a corrected copy.
Corrected
Let's do a
copy.
corrected copy.
Right.
With all these very last
Right.
minute changes, so we can
So that
vote
you
on
can see the
that.
red line changes.
So, yeah, I want
Thank
to
you.
know exactly what we're voting on.
And we have the motion, but I never got a second.
I'll second.
And Jenny has seconded. With that, we are ready to vote once we have a little more discussion with the corrected.
I don't
corrected
know that it will
copy.
take more discussion, but
Right.
I think I'd like to see the
I have to
corrected copy.
leave board members the opportunity to talk. So, with that said, we'll continue this until we get a little farther down the road. We'll then go to board member communications. Are there any board member communications? Something I would like to add to my yesterday is that from time to time on Mondays now, the state board for the water board chairs is holding a drought briefing. And those conference calls last all of about 5 to 10 minutes. And basically what we're hearing from Chief Counsel's office is that, not Chief Counsel's, from the state board, is that it's very dry. But they do talk about the water rights decisions that they are making. And it's grim, let me say that. There will be on the 11th of April a meeting in Sacramento of the water board's chairs, and I will be making available to all of you, some of you have seen it, a document that I actually prepared 2 documents, and without comment I'll make them available. Well, there will be some comment. How can I give them to you without some comment? One of the documents is a document pertaining to the duties and responsibilities of regional board members. And that document at this point in time is in Chief Counsel's office, and I understand it's moving quite expeditiously up the line. Is going to be out maybe today. The other document is a document which came about a concern of folks elsewhere that so much of the activities of the regional board seem to be moving into general orders, leaving less and less discretion to the individual regional boards. And particularly noted was the fact that we now have a stormwater order coming down. I've received feedback, a lot of complaints to the governor's office that there is a significant lack of consistency on some issues between regional boards, and this is of great concern. This the second document is aimed to, and in part, address that issue, and the second part of it is to find a way, not any more compensation on top of the great compensation we get already, but aim to find a way to at least increase recognition of the amount of time that it takes simply to prepare for meetings like this. And those 2 documents will be made available to you, and as there are updates as those are produced, they'll come to you. The next update will be the one out of Chief Counsel's office. So with that said,
Carl, I just wanted to add, when I testified at the Assembly Natural Resources Committee in Mercury, I just want to acknowledge that Vicki Whitney from the State Board was also there and testified on behalf of the State Board.
great. And the Mercury issue is one that I mentioned yesterday is being extremely significant, and one we're going to be taking up in front of this board in the future again. Any further? Okay, we'll go to then item 15 on the calendar. One change that the executive officer has told me that she will make
Dr.
to
Longley, you mean number 20?
20. Is that the executive officer report? 15.
Yes.
I have 15 stuck in my mind. I'm sorry. 20. There will be a change made to that very excellent report, and that there is going to be calling out the more specifically success in enrolling people into the coalitions, the numbers that are available to us. Thank you. And the executive officer has an award.
Yes. Yesterday, I recognized an employee that I wasn't aware was not in the audience. He's here today, so I'd like to make that recognition now.
Go ahead, please.
So this is recognizing Sean Walsh, environmental scientist in the confined animals unit. And Sean demonstrated superior job performance in the course of investigation and preparation of enforcement documents for a pair of challenging enforcement cases for the confined animal facilities regulatory unit. Those are our dairies and poultry facilities and swine facilities and feedlots. In the course of routine inspections in May 2012, Sean identified and documented numerous violations of the general order for existing milk cow dairies and the water code on an operating dairy and on a heifer ranch that had requested removal from the dairy general order. Sean worked diligently to identify the scope of the violations on both properties and assisted in the development of cleanup and abatement orders for the two facilities in an effort to obtain compliance. Sean displayed exemplary professionalism in the conduct of multiple inspections, over 27 inspections, and prepared a detailed inspection report necessitated by the lack of responsiveness from the discharger and the need to closely track the lack of compliance. Sean is an extremely dedicated employee who works long hours in the field to complete inspections and discharge investigations. His efforts have raised the profile of the Confined Animal Program, and for that he's being recognized.
Assume position. Never happy with the OG.
We should quickly change positions. That's right. All right, we're all good. Thanks. That's right. Thank you.
You know.
Thank you.
Uh-oh. You just demoted Dr. Longley. So, Dr. Longley, that is it for the executive officer report. I should note that there is a draft report out from EPA on a review by NPDS. It highlights some of the differences in the regional boards and how we handle things, and in listening to your report on the chair call and the concern many have about inconsistency, I do want to emphasize that we are different and there is sometimes some justifiable need to not come to the same outcome as other regional boards. However, being consistent in how we apply the rules is very important, and I think all of our executive officers and boards strive to implement the rules consistently, but the outcome may be different, and sometimes the outcome is what people focus on and not the process. And so we're working with State Board and EPA on this draft report. I distribute it to the chair and vice chair, and I'll distribute it also to the rest of the board members as well.
And I might add that I have that report heavily underlined. It causes great concern to me. I've written out some of my concerns, provided them to the executive officer. In particular, it really, in my opinion, would cause us result in, if we were to enact it and follow its recommendations, we would be using data that is not valid data. And we can go on and on. This is not the time and place for that, but it is a serious report. We vary so greatly from one end of this valley to the other. And if given that fact, you can imagine how we vary across the state. And so this whole issue of consistency so often doesn't take into account the place-to-place, site-specific differences that we have to deal with, the many, many factors. And I think that is lost oftentimes when people are making judgments about consistency. We have to find ways to correct that issue. We've been working on that for years. I was on a committee clear back in the 80s under the Wilson administration looking at that. It seems like we never get to the point where we can get consensus on what consistency is. With that said, we
I have
yes.
one thing to add.
Sure.
I just wanted to acknowledge on the financial reports, staff and Richard Lunkovich's efforts and our executive officer in ensuring that we maintain our funding on track and aren't exceeding expenses in any place. And I know we actually are being somewhat conservative on our personnel costs, but I think, and also ensuring that the billing goes to the appropriate categories, that's a big job, and I just want to acknowledge.
It
that
is,
looks
and we're
good.
constantly being requested by many dischargers to look at what we charge in terms of fees, because those do affect them greatly. But there's been a lot of change in how budgeting and finances are handled now, and we have not as much direct control over it as it's being done now. So, but clearly we work very closely with State Board, and you know, Richard is planning to retire in June, and so we will be losing a valuable resource there. Ken is scheduled to retire in November, so we'll have a huge impact on our regional board here in the next year. So this new process is new. It's somewhat frustrating a little bit for all the regional boards because it's different. But we're trying to learn how to work within it. But we have a lot less control, and we have a significant number of personnel savings because of our turnover being in the location we are. But we don't benefit from that as much as we used to either. So it's a new system, and it's somewhat a little frustrating for us, but we'll get through it. And I don't know how to. I'm scared when Richard leaves because he is my money man. I rely on him heavily.
Thank you. Any further comments? We'll move on then to agenda item 22. And Mr. Palupa, are you our counsel on this? Thank you. I looked around in panic.
And I apologize. I forgot to introduce Patrick this morning, so I apologize, Patrick.
Everybody knows Patrick. His presence is felt. This is a resolution to allow Rose Foundation to administer SEP funding. At this time, the board will consider a resolution to allow the Rose Foundation to administer supplemental environmental project, otherwise known as SEP funding, to projects benefiting disadvantaged communities. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. Following the staff presentation, interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now begin with the staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Longley, members of the board. My name is Robert LaRue, and I am a Senior Water Resource Control Engineer and the Enforcement Coordinator for the Central Valley Water Board. Today I'm here to ask you to adopt a resolution that would enable the Rose Foundation to administer SEP funding to projects that benefit both water quality and disadvantaged communities in the Central Valley. As we discussed at the February board meeting, this proposal is intended to encourage supplemental environmental projects, or SEPs, as part of settlement agreements. The primary reason dischargers are reluctant to enter into SEPs is the uncertainty that the projects would get completed. thereby keeping dischargers potentially responsible for the full amount of the penalty if the project doesn't meet completion milestones. Our goal was to find a way to remove some of that uncertainty while still operating within the SEP policy and the SEP criteria. We started this process last fall by meeting with environmental justice groups. One of those groups, the Community Water Center, brought in the Rose Foundation, and they developed a proposal in accordance with the SEP policy. Their proposal has been included as one of the attachments to this item. A few months ago, the Rose Foundation began soliciting projects and developing a project list for staff to review. The project list that they developed is another attachment to this agenda item. Soon after last month's board meeting, we posted the draft resolution that is in front of you to our website. This presentation is being made in an effort to inform you about the resolution, to address public comments, and to request that you adopt the resolution. This resolution bridges the gap between dischargers and SEP projects that benefit disadvantaged communities by identifying projects that have already been vetted and are simply awaiting funding. We feel that there is enough diversity, even in this pilot phase, to be able to fund projects with both large and small settlement amounts. The projects included in the attached list have been pre-approved by the Rose Foundation, regional board staff, and attorneys for the Office of Chief Counsel and the Office of Enforcement. Staff feel that this resolution would lend more confidence that dischargers can fund projects without concern for additional financial penalty. Specific details of the resolution include, with respect to performance of the projects and to facilitate the Rose Foundation's proposal, the board shall consider performance of the project to mean actual payment to the Rose Foundation of the amount agreed to by the discharger in the ACL order. The Rose Foundation will then confirm that the funds were paid to projects in an annual report to the board, at which point that portion of the liability will be permanently suspended. Projects proposed by the Rose Foundation shall adhere to the criteria of the SEP policy. That is, the SEP goes above and beyond the discharger's otherwise applicable obligations. The SEP will directly benefit or study groundwater or surface water. It will never directly benefit in a fiscal manner a water board's functions, its members, staff, or family members of staff, and the regional board may not manage the funds in an account. The Rose Foundation and board staff will ensure that a nexus exists between each violation and project in accordance with the SEP policy and criteria, and prior to the project getting funded. As a general rule, the costs associated with the oversight of the SEP are not costs that should be considered part of the direct cost of the SEP. Dischargers that wish to fund projects from the Disadvantaged Community SEP list shall work with the Rose Foundation to reimburse them for their oversight costs. Finally, with regards to auditing, by agreeing to participate in this project, the Rose Foundation also agrees to subject all of its accounting and project tracking materials related to the Disadvantaged Community SEP list to any audit at any time that is deemed necessary by the Central Valley Water Board or by any other state or federal agency that requires such auditing. The eligible project types per the Rose Foundation's proposal include water quality monitoring programs, well rehabilitation or replacement projects, watershed assessment programs, wetland water body or riparian habitat conservation or protection programs, pollution prevention projects, and public awareness projects. The Rose Foundation's proposal also states that grant decisions are based upon the benefits to disadvantaged communities, the degree of community support, and the degree of community involvement. In all, 14 projects were chosen by the Rose Foundation for this initial phase of this endeavor. This chart shows how many projects address each of the project types in the previous slide. As you can see, each of the project types are addressed multiple times by the existing project list. Most of the projects in this list address more than one of the project types in the Rose Foundation's proposal. Specific projects will be elaborated on later as part of this presentation. Pursuant to this resolution, the Rose Foundation shall update the Disadvantaged Community SEP list by January 31st of each year. Board staff shall make updates to the SEP list available for public comment for a 30-day period prior to the approval of the board's executive officer. During this annual update, the Rose Foundation will provide the board with information regarding the expenditure of SEP funds during the preceding calendar year. Copies of this report shall be submitted to all the dischargers that have contributed to the projects that have received funding from the Rose Foundation. The Rose Foundation shall also submit this report to the Division of Financial Assistance at the State Water Board declaring that the funds submitted to the Rose Foundation have been expended on eligible projects. Of course, this does not mean that all SEP funds must go to the Rose Foundation. Regional board staff are open to any and all proposals for SEPs or an approach similar to this one from another group working to protect water quality. However, staff recommend adopting this resolution due to the Rose Foundation's excellent track record and having over 20 years of experience in providing grants to community-based organizations and environmental justice programs. Their experience and success allow minimal oversight by staff that other SEPs would not provide. Staff think that more discharges will do more SEPs with this resolution in effect, and if successful, we will reevaluate and broaden the project list as we go forward per the conditions of the resolution. During the 30-day comment period for this resolution, staff received endorsements from the following parties: the State Water Board's Office of Enforcement, the Compton Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Community Water Center, the Center for Race, Poverty, and the Environment, the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water, and the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. These letters are included in a comment letter packet that was prepared for the board. One of the comment letters that posed some concerns was from the American Basin Council of Watersheds, or ABCW. Their March 4th letter is included in the comment letter packet in front of the board. Mr. Greg Bates, while representing that organization, voiced their concerns during the February board meeting information item for this topic. The ABCW commended staff's efforts to benefit disadvantaged communities and acknowledged the staff's interest to work with a reputable third-party organization like the Rose Foundation. However, they expressed their concern that the nexus criteria that are part of the region's SEP criteria may become secondary to the communities this resolution is seeking to benefit. The letter also expresses a desire for future coordination with regional board staff. Yes, this resolution is directed towards assisting disadvantaged communities with water quality projects, but I hope I'm clear today that staff's priority is, and always has been, to get more SEPs funded. Additionally, several of the projects proposed in the attached list are at least partially geared towards watershed assessment and/or wetland or riparian conservation and protection. With respect to the nexus requirements in the SEP policy and criteria, the Rose Foundation and staff are aware of those requirements and will ensure that a nexus linking each project to a violation is met. The Rose Foundation has extensive experience with nexus requirements for similarly arranged federal SEP programs. Finally, staff look forward to working with ABCW and any and all entities interested in putting SEPs forward. Another comment letter that raised some concerns was from the Central Valley Clean Water Association, or CVICWA. Their March 17th letter is also included in the board's comment letter packet. One concern noted in CVICWA's letter is that it be made clear that the Rose Foundation is just one option and not a mandatory entity for those seeking to implement a SEP. The letter requests the inclusion of additional language or an additional finding indicating that entities subject to ACLs may propose other SEPs. Staff will leave this to the board's discretion, but the resolution is written to be permissive and not limiting. Ultimately, it is up to the dischargers to determine which projects will be funded. All reasonable SEP proposals that are made during settlement negotiations will be considered. The CVICWA letter also notes that administrative costs assessed by the Rose Foundation should not be part of the SEP itself, and the terms administrative costs and oversight costs are not necessarily equal. The policy states that a third party can provide oversight in lieu of oversight by water board staff. The Rose Foundation are proposing to provide oversight of the SEPs, will oversee financial expenditures, and will provide reports back to the board. By performing these functions, the Rose Foundation will provide third-party oversight of the SEPs on the attached list. To the extent that the Rose Foundation's administrative costs are not considered oversight costs, they can be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Another comment notes that the Rose Foundation's sliding fee schedule, as included in the proposal, is up to 10% for projects under $500,000. The letter recommends limiting the oversight cost to no more than 5% of the amount allocated. In this regard, again, it would be up to the individual dischargers to accept the Rose Foundation's oversight costs to proceed with their SEPs. If they prove to be prohibitive, we can meet with the Rose Foundation to consider alternatives. Mr. Tim Little of the Rose Foundation is here today and can provide more input on his organization's oversight costs with respect to federal SEP programs that they have worked with. The final comment from the Civiqua letter dealt with the advocacy nature of the Central California Environmental Justice Network project, which, to Civiqua, appeared aimed at gathering information to aid in investigation and enforcement. If I may quote from the project proposal at issue, "Our focus with Water Watchers is to build off the momentum that is surging in these communities to establish a group of residents that is interested in monitoring and preserving water quality in their community. These Water Watchers will begin to document data on problematic facilities or other sources of pollution, which will be stored through our Fern and Keene databases and will be used to aid in enforcement actions. Fern is the Fresno Environmental Reporting Network, and Keene is the Kern Environmental Enforcement Network. The Central California Environmental Justice Network identifies these two entities as resident reporting networks of environmental hazards in their respective counties. Staff's perspective is that the groups that may receive funding for their SEP proposals are looking to work with regulators, and staff do not intend to restrain them from using data gathered in watershed assessments to advocate for the enforcement of environmental violations that may be discovered therein. Moreover, any member of the public, essentially anyone, has the opportunity to file a complaint about an observed or threatened discharge to the waters of the state. By adopting this resolution, the board is not encouraging more enforcement, but rather providing disadvantaged communities with a greater knowledge and capacity to protect their communities and natural resources. Furthermore, the water quality needs of disadvantaged communities go beyond simply obtaining safe drinking water, and so staff does not recommend limiting the scope of the SEP proposals in the manner suggested in Civiqua's letter. This concludes my portion of the presentation. At this time, I would like to invite Tim Little, the Executive Director and co-founder of the Rose Foundation, to elaborate on some of the specific projects that are part of this initial phase of this endeavor. Tim.
Thank you. Dr. Longley and members of the board, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak for a couple minutes today. And I really want to thank you for encouraging the development of this proposal to find ways to maximize the benefit of your enforcement programs and help that flow to the community as it addresses water quality issues. Robert's explained how the program works, and there are detailed materials in your packet. I can go into all the detail you want on that, but I thought that what I should do is tell you a little bit about how this initial project list got put together, what's going to happen if you support this project, what's going to happen going forward, and then say a couple words about just a couple of the projects to give you a more in-depth flavor of what they look like. In developing this initial project list, we've done limited outreach. We didn't think it made sense to do a broad, open application process throughout the valley when we weren't sure if you were going to approve it. So we've looked at this as a pilot phase. What we did is we reviewed our database of organizations in the Central Valley that serve disadvantaged communities, that work on water quality issues. And we also targeted outreach geographically because we wanted to make sure that we were giving you a list that was representative of the entire area and had projects throughout your 3 regions. Ultimately, we invited 27 organizations to apply. From there, we engaged in numerous follow-up discussions, a lot of lengthy one-on-one with prospective applicants. Most of the smaller groups, we coached them through the process and in some cases helped them complete their application so that they could conform to your standards and translate the work that they're doing into the kind of language and standards that are needed for the SEP program. It's a really high-touch, time-consuming process. It's the kind of thing we do at the Rose Foundation. I think we're good at it. We then engaged with your staff to make sure that none of our recommended applicants were adverse to any of your board's established interests or policies, and that all of them were a real bullseye fit for your SEP criteria. And ultimately, we ended up with the list of 14 projects in front of you today. I just want to say that this is nowhere close to the total amount of applicants. We felt it was a manageable and representative pilot phase pool. If we get the green light to go forward, we'll be conducting an annual open application process that's very extensive. I could go into a lot of the detail about what that involves if you're interested. In terms of how this initial grant cycle would proceed, once SEP penalties come into this disadvantaged community water quality fund, we'll negotiate grant contracts with specific applicants from the project list. And the individual grants will tie into any specific nexus requirements from the settlement. For example, if a settlement is based in Red Bluff, we're looking for a project that's centered in that area. The projects can be scaled up or down based on the actual money available, all of that within the framework of the overall project descriptions in front of you. And the grant contracts that we execute will identify specific deliverables and performance milestones, and that ensures that we can hold the grantees accountable to do the work that they're being funded to do. And then we have ongoing active oversight over the projects until they're completed to make sure they stay on track. We'll be reporting back to you every year to describe the projects funded, and through these performance tracking, we'll be able to come to you and say, this one's completed, this one's 50% complete, this one's 20% complete, that type of thing.
Sir, how much longer do you have? You covered most of this, I think, in your last presentation.
Yeah, thank you, sir. If it pleases you, I could go into a couple of minutes on a couple of the projects to give you the flavor of it, or if you've had a chance to review the materials, I could stop here and just take any questions.
What's your pleasure?
I think it's fine to stop, Tim. I do want to say first off that you commented that we think we are good at it, and I would like to affirm the fact that I too think you're very, very good at it. And
thank you.
I think in terms of whether you call it oversight costs or administrative costs, the Rose Foundation is one of the most efficient organizations at this kind of work. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I reviewed the projects that were listed in our packet, and they all seem very interesting, very exciting. So I don't think you need to go through them, at least with me. But I just want to thank you for the presentation, bringing this forward to us. That was one thing I had asked for, is to see kind of some on-the-ground examples of what might be done with the SEP money, and so I'm really glad to see that there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I read through the projects and I like it, and I also like your characterization of this being a pilot program, so that people who may have felt like they didn't have the opportunity to present maybe a worthwhile project will know that coming up there's going to be additional opportunities. I think that that's important.
Depending on what you decide to do today, I'm looking forward to putting out a broad notice that lets people know how this will go forward.
Yeah, and
Thank you very much.
We have a huge issue in mercury and methyl mercury, and I'm sure some of these projects over time will help address that issue. So,
thank you.
and,
Thank you
and
very
I just want to say too is I think one of the other board members referred to that is this is an effort to encourage more SEPs, and I think this just makes that pie bigger. I don't think this will take away from other projects that are underway. I think it'll create a more efficient management program that provides assurances to local regulated bodies that are dealing with these issues, that good projects are going to happen. And I think whenever we have to, there are costs, whether they're fines or cease and abatement orders or what, administrative liabilities, people want to know those get used effectively, and this program will help us do that. So thank you very much.
Mr. Longley. I just want to make a comment that I think the Rose Foundation has helped a lot of disadvantaged communities in the water quality, finding the assistance, having the communities grow and learn and how to go out and resolve those issues. I know that, I think I'll say this in Alpa, there's a contamination of arsenic, which is a natural born contaminant. Anyway, I know Mr. Longley talked to me about it for many years past, about having a pipeline from Alpa to Early Mart, 13 miles. And this community has learned and has capacity building to now talk about a 5.5-mile course from Anjola, Alpa, and Allensworth, which is called a AAA, and that's what's in the work. And without the disadvantaged communities learning and having some, like the Rose Foundation, help them, many wouldn't be where they're at now trying to fix the water issues. And there's a lot of water issues, plus a lot of local issues. Thank you.
At this time, I would like to formally recommend that the board adopt this resolution to approve a proposal by the Rose Foundation to assist in the disbursement and oversight of funds directed to supplemental environmental projects to benefit disadvantaged communities. I am happy to address any questions or comments you may have. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you very much for a very good presentation. Ready now to call interested parties. Elizabeth Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Izzy Martin. I'm the CEO of the Sierra Fund. I'm also the chair of the Consumnes American Bear Yuba Integrated Regional Water Management Group. I'm here today to, first of all, thank and congratulate the board and your very creative staff for coming up with this innovative idea, and to thank Rose Foundation for helping to catalyze it. I have been working on environmental justice issues for decades, and I'm thrilled to see this new resource offered for community engagement, and particularly the engagement of disadvantaged communities, like where I'm from, the Sierra Nevada, very remote, very rural. We are pleased to see this kind of investment in helping disadvantaged community members conceive, design, and implement services which deliver clean water to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Caitlin Toyoma.
Hi, my name's Caitlin Toyam, and I'm a programs associate with the Community Water Center. And first, I'd like to thank the board for their leadership in developing the SEP program and working to make sure that all Californians have access to clean, safe, and affordable drinking water. The Community Water Center is an environmental justice and nonprofit based in Visalia, and we work with disadvantaged communities, predominantly Latino, farm worker, and rural, that lack access to safe drinking water. We strongly believe that the SEP program is a great use of funding to create drinking water solutions for the communities that need them the most, and we strongly support the staff's recommendation that the Rose Foundation administer the SEP funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Debbie Webster? No comments. I have a card here. Heidi, I'm having a bit of a problem with your last name. Oh, it's Sanborn. Okay. Your
Good
E
morning.
looks like an I. I mean,
I'm
your N
sorry.
looks
My
like
husband
an
says
I.
I should have been a doctor. I can't write very well.
Sorry.
Good morning. I'm Heidi Sanborn. I'm the executive director of the California Product Stewardship Council, and we would administer one of these projects. And I just want to say that we've been working on, the project we're going to be working on, hopefully, has been built on the project that we've already done with Sacramento and Yolo counties. And we've partnered with them. They love the project because it's preventative of pollution, and particularly pharmaceutical pollution into our waterways, and thereby saving money for the monitoring and cleanup with sewage. And it is an example of a project that is enthusiastically received by the dischargers. The disadvantaged communities of San Joaquin County are very excited about it. We've got lots of partners. They're very eager to get started, as are we. So we thank you very much for consideration of this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point in time, I have no more interested parties. Any?
The executive.
Yes.
I can't, oh, there I go. Thank you. Dr. Longley, hearing the people come forward, I just realized that at the last CV Salts meeting, Phoebe Seaton came up to me and said she could not rearrange all of her meetings to come here today, but I told her I would promise that I would express her support of this to the board. She is the co-director for the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and she comes to the board many times, but she couldn't be here today.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Any discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd be very happy to go on the record as making a motion in support of this proposal.
Do I have a second? I'll second. Thank you. Carmen's moved. Jenny seconded. All in favor of the motion state so by saying, of the resolution state so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Mr. Coop, are we ready to go back to,
I think we're ready to go back to item 15.
why am I been seeing you in my dreams lately, Mr. Coop?
Ooh, we want to know why.
No. It's these emails and phone calls, I tell you. Okay, we're back on item 15, and we're receiving a updated copy of the proposed order.
So the advisory team has made changes consistent with what we believe was direction that we received from the board, and you have color copies, as Ken was nice enough to print out, and you see those changes. Everything, I think, from at least our perspective, is represented here, I think, faithfully, except for, it looks like we may have missed one of the dates on page 12, paragraph, or task 7, where it says 1 June 2015. I think that needs to say 1 July 2015, and Alex already checked his calendar, and I don't think that falls on a weekend. So if you want to take a minute or so and take a look at the changes, and if you have any questions, let us know.
Mr. Schneider.
I'd be happy to move this cleanup and abatement order with that one correction on the date.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Dr. Longley, just before the board votes, what I did hear as part of the motion was direction provided for a letter to be written to the Forest Service, I think at the Assistant Executive Officer level, to the Forest Service, just underscoring the board's earnestness and seriousness in addressing this approach, and looking forward to continued collaboration in cleaning up the mine tailing site.
You are correct. That's the intent of this board, and it's part of the record. Any discussion on the motion? If not, then we will proceed with voting. This is a voice vote. All in favor of the order state so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you very much. I extend my thanks to all parties involved. Although we may not agree on issues, it was a very professional presentation. Thank you.
Dr. Longley, may I approach your court reporter just to place an order for the transcript?
I'm sorry?
May I approach your reporter just to place an order
Oh,
for the
certainly.
transcript?
And what we are going to do right now is, it says 20 minutes after, we'll be back here at 10:30. We're in recess.
King River. It's also commonly called the Salt and Boron TMDL. I will probably refer to it as the control program. Joe is here representing the San Joaquin River's West Side Coalition, and Roberta is a staff member representing the United States Bureau of Reclamation, which we refer to as the Bureau or Reclamation. We are providing this status report because there are key compliance dates coming up, and the board will be asked to consider proposed compliance actions by dischargers at a future board meeting. I will begin by presenting a brief description of the regulatory history and modified hydrology of the river that has resulted in the salinity problem in the lower San Joaquin River Basin. Also, I will update you on the requirements and status of the control program. Next, Joe will present the status of stakeholder efforts to implement real-time salinity management in the basin. And after Joe, Roberta will present a brief description of the modeling tool being developed for forecasting river salinity conditions. Finally, I will summarize this presentation and next steps. The control program is phased to allow for implementation of existing water quality objectives while providing the framework and timeline for implementing future water quality objectives. Our presentation today focuses on compliance with salinity objectives in the San Joaquin River as it enters the Delta. Implementation of this phase should help inform the staff on the next phase. Although not the focus of today's presentation, staff is actively working with the CV Salts on the development of salinity objectives for the lower San Joaquin River upstream of Vernalis. The San Joaquin River originates in the Sierra Nevada and flows west into the floor of the valley, where it turns and flows north to the Delta. Most of the upper San Joaquin flows are diverted out of the river here at Friant Dam, which is part of Reclamation's Central Valley project. Most of the water collected at Friant Dam is sent south to Kern County and the city of Bakersfield. For over 50 years, these diversions have resulted in long stretches of the river between Friant Dam and the mouth of the Merced River, receiving no fresh water most of the time. Downstream of the Merced River, flows in the San Joaquin River increase and salinity levels decrease somewhat as it picks up water from the east side tributaries, primarily the Merced, the Tuolumne, and the Stanislaus. In order to replace water that has been diverted at Friant Dam, Reclamation imports water from the Delta near Tracy. It transports the water by means of the Delta-Mendota Canal to farmers and wetlands on the west side of the river. Prior to construction of Friant Dam, many of these farmers and wetlands received their water from the San Joaquin River itself. This has highly modified the natural hydrology of the river, resulting in a system today that is dominated by agricultural return flows much of the year with corresponding elevated salinity. Because the salinity levels in the Delta water are significantly higher than the diverted San Joaquin River water originating from the Sierra, approximately 500,000 tons of salt are now being imported into the lower San Joaquin River basin every year. The salinity problem on the San Joaquin River has been recognized for decades. Throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, state board water rights permits for the Central Valley Project included salinity control terms and conditions. In '76, the University of California conducted a study of the effects of salinity on Delta crops. The study calculated the maximum salinity of applied water which would sustain 100% yield of two important salt-sensitive crops: beans during the summer season and alfalfa during the winter. In 1978, the State Board adopted the Water Quality Control Plan for the Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta, and Suisun Bay. Based on the UC study, the plan established salinity objectives to protect southern Delta agriculture, still in effect today. The objectives require that the 30-day running average electrical conductivity be no more than 700 microsiemens per centimeter during the irrigation season and 1,000 during the non-irrigation season. In December of 1999, the State Water Board issued and shortly thereafter revised Water Right Decision 1641, or D 1641. Among many other things, D 1641 addressed key provisions associated with implementation of water quality objectives for the San Francisco Bay, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta estuary. Decision 1641 assigned responsibility for meeting the objectives, known as the Vernalis objectives, to the Bureau of Reclamation. The San Joaquin River at Vernalis is the primary compliance point for meeting the agricultural salinity objectives I mentioned previously. Currently, Reclamation meets its responsibility by providing releases from New Melones Reservoir on the Stanislaus River, which enters the San Joaquin just upstream of Vernalis. Decision 1641 also directed the Central Valley Water Board to promptly develop and adopt salinity objectives upstream of Vernalis. Also, 1641 directed the Central Valley Water Board to evaluate programs to regulate the timing of agricultural discharges to the San Joaquin River. In response to the requirements of Decision 1641 and federal requirements to develop TMDLs, the Central Valley Water Board staff developed the Basin Plan Amendment for the control of salt and boron discharges into the lower San Joaquin River. The board adopted it in September of 2004, and the Office of Administrative Law approved it in July of 2006. The control program's initial focus is on meeting the objectives in the San Joaquin River at Vernalis. In addition to achieving compliance with the Vernalis water quality objectives, objectives of the control program include providing the framework for implementing objectives upstream of Vernalis without restricting the ability to export salt out of the river basin. Of importance, the control program recognizes that by meeting the salinity objectives, the boron objectives will also be met. There are 4 options for dischargers with irrigation return flow to comply with the control program. The first is to cease discharge to surface water. The second, if discharge does not exceed 315 microsiemens per centimeter electrical conductivity. The third, operate under WDRs that include effluent limits for salt or fixed load limits. And the fourth is to operate under a waiver of waste discharge requirements for salt and boron discharges to the lower San Joaquin by participating in a real-time salinity management program.
Could you explain that last one just a little bit more? I'm not as familiar with that as I should be.
Well, essentially the idea was to give the dischargers a chance to maximize their discharges, and I'll be explaining this,
but is this
further on.
Okay, is this part of?
Yes, it's part of the control program.
It is one of the options in the control program. There were 4 different options that have been provided. The first was to cease discharge. The second was to control the quality of the discharge. The third was to operate under requirements that actually metered out the load of salt that was coming into the system. But the control program also recognized that salinity was a little bit different, and that a better way of managing it may be to actually move the salinity load around based on when there may be dilution capacity and assimilative capacity. And we actually have a slide that's the very next slide that'll explain that a little
okay.
better.
Thank you.
But there were 4 choices.
We've done this in the past when we've
Yeah.
had releases from
Yeah,
New Melones and elsewhere.
Right.
Thank you.
And the third option is pretty restrictive, very conservative, so the fourth option is a pretty important option for people. Okay, you may have seen this figure before. This figure shows how real-time management would work. The graph shows the electrical conductivity levels in the San Joaquin River at Vernalis from the fall of '92 through the fall of '93. The dashed horizontal lines show the electrical conductivity objectives for the river at Vernalis. The dashed line on the right side represents the Vernalis objective for the irrigation season, and the one on the left side for the non-irrigation season. Whenever the graph line goes above the dashed line, such as in April and August, EC levels exceed the Vernalis objective. By contrast, when the graph line is below the dashed lines, the river had assimilative capacity to take on more salt without exceeding the Vernalis objectives. So, if some of the salt discharged to the river during those times of exceedances could have been controlled and released to coincide with those periods where there was assimilative capacity, the exceedances could have been avoided. That is the basic concept behind real-time water salinity management. Okay, the control program includes a prioritized schedule for implementation in 7 sub-areas. Priority is based on the magnitude of each sub-area's contribution in tons per acre in the total salt load discharged to the river. The map shows the locations of 7 control sub-areas, including the northwest side, the grassland, the Tuolumne River, the East Valley floor, the San Joaquin River upstream of Salt Slough, the Merced River, and the Stanislaus River. These 7 subareas and the Delta-Mendota Canal each must come into compliance with the control program under the following prioritized schedule. Excuse me. This compliance schedule applies to both implementation of fixed load discharges under WDRs and to compliance with objectives under a board-approved real-time management program. The first deadline is July 28th of this year and applies to the northwest side and grassland subareas and to the Delta-Mendota Canal. However, compliance is not required for a critically dry year until 2018. The second deadline is July 2018 for the Tuolumne River subarea, and the deadline for the last 4 is July 2022. As with the first deadline, compliance is 4 years later for critically dry years. Okay. So where are we? The Vernalis objectives have been continually met since the 1995 water year, primarily due to Reclamation's compliance with Water Right Decision 1641. Reclamation continues to release flow from New Melones Reservoir on the Stanislaus River to meet the Vernalis water quality objectives. Of note, salt loads in the river have decreased as a result of the Grassland Bypass Project's salinity management actions. Provisions for implementation of the control program have been incorporated by reference into the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program general orders for the east and the west side coalitions. It is recognized that reducing salts and adjusting the timing of discharges could save water that is currently used for dilution. Now I turn your attention to the salt loads imported by Reclamation through the Delta-Mendota Canal. The control program sets load allocations for salts imported to the lower San Joaquin River Basin from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. The control program directed the Central Valley Water Board to attempt to enter into a management agency agreement, or MAA, with Reclamation to address salt imports from the Delta-Mendota Canal to the lower San Joaquin River watershed. The control program recognized that the control program required that the MAA include provisions for Reclamation to meet its DMC load allocations or provide mitigation and or dilution flows to create additional assimilative capacity for salt in the lower San Joaquin River, equivalent to DMC salt loads in excess of the load allocations. I always find that statement a little hard to follow, but it makes sense if you think about it. The control program required the board to request a report of waste discharges from Reclamation if an MAA was not established. Well, of course, Reclamation and the Water Board signed a management agency agreement in December of 2008. In the MAA, Reclamation agreed to initiate stakeholder efforts to develop real-time management for the river, offset a minimum of 25% of the excess DMC salt load, implement their action plan incorporated by reference into the MAA, titled Actions to Address the Salinity and Boron TMDL Issues for the Lower San Joaquin River, which describes past, current, and planned actions to mitigate and manage adverse impacts to salt and boron imported to the river by the DMC. They also agreed to submit quarterly water quality reports, a West Side water balance report, and a West Side salt and nitrate balance report, and to seek funding for salinity control efforts in the watershed. However, uncertainty regarding the viability of real-time management led the agencies to implement the MAA actions in 2 steps. The first step began with the signing of the 2008 MAA. The second step was envisioned to be developed after determining if real-time management was viable. Well, Reclamation is nearing completion of the monitoring, quantification, and evaluation work it agreed to in the 2008 MAA and the results have prompted reclamation and other interested parties to proceed with development of a real-time salinity management program for the river, for the lower San Joaquin River. Key real-time management program items nearing completion are the framework document and a forecasting tool. You will hear about both of these next. Concurrently, work is underway on the development of the 2014 updated MAA that I mentioned earlier. It builds on the 2008 MAA results and focuses real-time management support on coordination between reclamation stakeholders and other interested parties in implementation and continued development of real-time management. We anticipate bringing this 2014 MAA to the board in the summer of this year. Although the primary reason for this presentation is to update you on the status of the work under the MAA with Reclamation and Reclamation's effort with a real-time management program, I wanted to touch on a parallel activity under the Salt and Borne Control Program, the development of water quality objectives upstream of Vernalis. Following board approval of the control program amendment, these activities took place. CEQA scoping sessions, public workshops, follow-up CEQA scoping, and a draft salt tolerance report for crops irrigated by San Joaquin River water. Following receipt of public comments on the draft report, it was decided to incorporate the water quality objectives development into the CV Salts initiative. To this end, the Lower San Joaquin River Committee was formed. To date, the committee has reviewed existing beneficial uses and updated baseline water quality conditions. Also, the committee is in the process of developing ranges of water quality objectives for evaluation, updating the 2010 crop tolerance report, developing a screening matrix of salinity control actions that will be issued to develop 3 implementation alternatives for consideration. Also, the committee is fine-tuning the modeling tool for alternative evaluation. We anticipate bringing this upstream water quality objective to the board in December of 2015. The real-time management program will come to the board in the summer of this year for consideration of board approval. The next speakers will discuss some of the key components of the program and the current status. Joe will discuss the real-time management framework document being developed by a number of stakeholders. And Roberta will discuss the development of a modeling tool for real-time river salinity forecasting. This tool is really, it's quite important or perhaps critical in as a critical component of real-time management. I would like now to introduce Joe McGann, representing the West Side Coalition.
Thank you, board members. My name is Joe McGann. I'm with Summers Engineering, and I'm the watershed coordinator for the West Side San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition, the Irrigated Lands Coalition on the west side of the river, also drainage coordinator for the Grassland Bypass Project. So basically, I'm sitting before you today because on the west side of the river is the group of farmers and entities that have this first deadline of July of this year to comply with this program, as opposed to my compatriots on the other side of the river who have a later deadline. So that's why we're active in this. The real-time salinity management framework document is basically says how we intend to develop a real-time program. So it includes meeting salinity. The objective is to meet salinity water quality objectives of Vernalis. And just to emphasize what Jim said, those objectives have been met every year since 1994. Because of related things that are being done, including the Grassland Bypass Project and releases from Eastside reservoirs, including New Melones Reservoir, but they have been met since '94. The framework would allow then export of salts, as Jim explained, in times when it could be done and not be above objectives, and it could reduce reliance on New Melones, which would be a good thing at times when water quality objectives are being met. And the other thing is that we're taking the lead on is establishing an organization to help deal with the framework and implementation of the program. So the components of a real-time program is an organization structure. I'll discuss that a little bit. A monitoring network, so monitoring stations and data from those stations, and then a projection of what salinity objectives in the river would be through the modeling forecasting tool, which Roberta will talk about. And then a little bit about physical infrastructure and changes in management practices that might be implemented to do the program. And then, of course, maybe a funding base that would be for projects. This is kind of a complicated little slide. I apologize for that, but the Memorandum of Understanding would provide a way for folks to participate, deal with governance of a real-time program, to contribute funding if needed, and data for the program. So it's a flexible program that would allow the people to join, especially folks in the east side of the river who have a later compliance date. If they decided they didn't want to comply or be a partner now, they could in the future. Currently, it's envisioned the participants in this Memorandum of Understanding would be the West Side San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition. Again, the Irrigated Lands General Order on the west side, which is incorporated that we will comply with the salt and boron TMDL. And also the Grassland Basin Drainers, who have contributed to salt reductions, but also are required to comply with this program. The MOU, the West Side Coalition, includes wetland areas, that is private state wetlands, federal wetlands, as well as private wetlands in the Grassland Resource Conservation District. So it's not only farmers, but it includes those folks too who are a key part of the program. This is a little map that shows in the purple is the boundary of the West Side San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition, boundary adopted in January for compliance with the Irrigated Lands Program. So it's by far the bulk of the area on the west side. The area down here in the bottom middle is the grassland drainage area, which is the area that is part of the selenium control program and has reduced drainage discharges to the river, which of course has reduced salt discharge to the river also. We have proposed a phased program in the framework document. Because not all of a lot of the area in the watershed might join in the first phase, because the west side is obligated to has the first deadline. Why it's reasonable to do a phased program. Also, a phasing, as we know this year, we're in an unprecedented drought condition on the west side, as the whole state is, and so a phasing seems appropriate for that. Also, there's groundwater accretion is one of the sources of salt into the San Joaquin River. And really, that's very difficult to control, groundwater accretion, so it's reasonable, we think, to do a phased program. The first phase, which I've shown here, has a first compliance date of July 28th of 2014. Because this year is a critical year, it's possible that could be delayed up to a year, because in critical years, the deadline is 4 years later. But so we know this is going to be a critical year, so that could be delayed. A part of the first phase would be to identify monitoring stations necessary for the model, to talk about forecasting interval, to develop operation and maintenance requirements for the stations that would be used in the model, to complete what we call some pilot studies, and I'll kind of identify those a little later, develop this MOU to organize participants in the program, and the development of the management agency agreement between Reclamation and the Central Valley Board. Phase 2, we have scheduled it to be completed 12 months after the first compliance date. It envisioned in Phase 2 that stakeholders participating in the program would demonstrate and refine salinity management methods as possible. We would evaluate existing projects that are going on, like Grassland Resource Conservation Monitoring Project and the Grassland Bypass Project. We would continue to improve our monitoring stations as needed, as we see improvements are needed, install additional stations that might be needed. all through these phases. There's, you know, other participants can come on as needed if they want to come on, why the MOU allows for that. Part of this phase would be continue to develop the data platform to support the forecasting that would be needed. Phase 3 is intended to be completed 36 months after the first completion date. We envision that in this phase there actually would be forecasting completed that would be provided to stakeholders. Data sharing is a key to all of this, and so up to this point we would be developing our data sharing methods. We would analyze the need for additional infrastructure projects, if you will, that might be utilized to comply with the program. Part of this also might be development of management practices that we can recommend to farmers and folks to implement, and then continued outreach.
We're not moving.
There we go. The final phase is a ways out, 60 months out, but again, because I've indicated why this is an important thing to have these phases. In addition, 60 months is some of the implementation dates for some of the groups on the east side are even beyond this. But it's envisioned that in this, the participants would be implementing, monitoring, data networking, management activities, and the forecasting tool to control timing of discharges as needed. We'd be addressing long-term funding and management needs. Additional parties would have to have joined, or if they wanted to participate, their compliance date would be within this time period. So the anticipation is they would join our program and be a more active participant. And it is the phase 4 would be continuous implementation, would bring about improvements to data processing, quality assurance, and river assimilative capacity forecasting modeling. This is just a quick map that shows the monitoring stations we've identified that would be useful. Here's the San Joaquin River coming in from Friant and going up, and Vernalis is in the northwest side up here. So we've identified at both river sites where existing monitoring is going on, tributary sites like the Stanislaus and Merced rivers, Tuolumne rivers, west side discharge locations, east side locations, diversion sites, which of course occur along the river, which are important, and then also wastewater treatment plants, which do discharge into the river in some locations. A couple examples then of things that control activities, maybe not necessarily implemented specifically to deal with the real-time program, but which have resulted in decreased salt discharges to the river. One is the Grassland Resource Conservation District Monitoring Program, which is really developed to provide data on when discharges occur in a real-time program, very robust program. The Grassland Bypass Project, which you're familiar with, again, a selenium control project, but has resulted in large decreases in the salt load at Vernalis. Because of the project, there's about 10% less salt at Vernalis than there was before the project. And then some of our districts in the northwest side have some reservoirs, used multi-purpose reservoirs. They're used to capture tailwater, which has salt in it before it's discharged to the river, and they reuse it. But again, it's a project that has contributed to reduce salt load in the river and meeting these standards. That concludes my comments.
No, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Roberta Tassi, and I'm a project manager with the Bureau of Reclamation. I'd like to also acknowledge that behind me I have Dr. Nigel Quinn, who works for Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and has been working as a consultant to reclamation for over 20 years in the Central Valley. On the other side of the room, Mr. Michael Mosley is Reclamation's water quality coordinator, who has been working on this program for salt, but also works on the mercury problems for reclamation. I also want to recognize Mr. Joel Horer, who is a professional engineer and president of Systech Water Resources, who is our developer of our model. The model that we're going to be talking about today is called the Watershed Analysis Risk Management Framework, or what we call WARMF. And the San Joaquin River WARMF forecast model and a manager module is funded by Reclamation, and we've been working real hard on them since September of this year. We are guided by a technical research team, including representatives of Reclamation, Central Valley Water Board, DWR, and the Westside and San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition. Now, I just must say that this model is not a plug-and-go model. It's still under development, and in saying that, we set up specific short milestones, and I manage the program this way so we can show our progress and diverge if necessary if something's not working. But again, I just want to make clear that we are in development. The WARMF model has been being used in the Central Valley since 2005. It was developed in the 1980s by US EPA, but Systech's been managing it since 2005.
And my understanding is it's applicable to surface waters and shallow groundwater. Is that correct?
Yes. And it's not just for salt either. It's for other constituent, and Systech has been using it for other entities such as Metropolitan and California Department of Fish and Game, so that you know that it's really a robust model. Now, the program is designed in order to be a successful real-time management program. The stakeholders have to work together to get a board-approved real-time management program. And by the drafting of the framework, the MOU, and the MAA, I think all participants are showing that they have that intent. They've been establishing monitoring networks, and the program is also, of course, to export the salt when the river has the assimilative capacity so that it will be able to assimilate the salt in the river and meet the water quality objectives at Vernalis. And one of the main goals of this program is to promote sharing of the real-time data and other data. And that is a big part of having a successful program, is the sharing of the data, which I've said once. I'm probably going to say that again. And our backup plan to meet the water quality objectives of Vernalis is always to provide releases, or to try to provide releases from New Melones. Now, in regards to the models that we're developing, we needed to initiate the stakeholder efforts to develop a real-time management program. We've done that. And we are using monitoring and modeling to determine assimilative capacity for the river. And now I'd like to start going over what we call the decision support tools, including the models that are used for a real-time management program. The program would not be anything without the monitoring network. The stations are located, Joe showed a figure with the river stations, and this is used to calculate the assimilative capacity in the river. But there's other stations that are in the Grassland Bypass area, and Grassland Water District has a pilot study that we'll talk about a little bit. Now, another support tool that we use and was developed by Dr. June Wang of Reclamation was a visualization tool. The visualization tool, the intent was to identify how to manage data and how to show what's going on in the individual watersheds. And we're using this as an example for future entities or irrigation districts when they're trying to develop their program, that they can look to Grassland Water District and see how they're managing their data and managing to their salt loads. One of the added benefit of the visualization tools that Grassland Water District experienced was they found that they were able to promote conservation and reuse of their water. Now, this is a screenshot of the visualization tool, and it shows EC, load, calculated load, and flow. And what I want you to take away from this slide is to think of it like an automobile GPS. You're going down the highway, you're stopped. The GPS shows that it's red. There's been an accident. And so it's able to direct you for another route. And so the GPS allows you to manage your drive and your time. This visualization tool will have the entities will be able to manage their salt and their salt loading to the river. Now we're going to start talking about the warmth forecast model. The model integrates the model, the databases, and geographical software. It's used to predict hydrology, water quality, and it's been adapted for the San Joaquin River. The model collects, stores, manages input data from the San Joaquin River, the tributaries, the diversions, and the discharges to the river. The model presents EC flow and calculates the salt load, and it can do real-time data and forecast data 2 weeks into the future. But I have to tell you, this model is not easy to use. And it's a little unwieldy. And we need to always collect better data to make the model better to run. Anyway, how we are doing this and how we're approaching this was Joel Horer is creating a manager module. This is more user-friendly. And we're hoping that it will solve the problems, but it is still in the development stages, so I have to tell you that and keep stressing that. The module presents EC flow and calculated load in a user-friendly atmosphere, and we're developing this to complete forecasts that will be completed for a similar capacity, and the forecasts will initially be run by representative of DWR, the board, reclamation, and will complete daily and weekly forecasts. We're planning to go online with this, to have an online platform, and it'll be accessible to water coordinators and the public. The current status of this manager module is that we are seeking water coordinator input. We're still in development, and their input is necessary for us to have a good model. And I don't want you to get scared about this, but this is a screenshot of what the manager model can produce. And I'd like you to take a look at this, and what I'd like you to look at is this is from the time period of February 2013 through March 30th of 2013. And on the right here, at Lander Avenue to Vernalis, we have the discharge entities or location points. And on the graph here, these discharges are in the same order. So you have to keep the colors correct, and it goes again from Lander Avenue down to Vernalis. The red line is the assimilative capacity. And so that's the ability of the river to accept salt and meet the water quality objective at Vernalis. The units in this graph are salt load at tons per day. This large area in yellow is mud slough. The green area is salt slough, and I thought I'd just put those on there so you can have an idea of where we're at. The blue arrow here is the assimilative capacity, and it goes from the salt load, which is the dark black line, solid line that goes across. That's the maximum salt load if you added up all of the entities that are discharging salt. So on February 26th, there was about 1,200 tons of additional salt capacity that could have been discharged in the river on February 26, 2013. And I think...
Could you go back to that slide, please?
Oops. Sure.
Just looking at that, the bulk of the salt's coming out of mud slough, and To what degree is your program focusing on mud slough?
Mud slough is where Mud slough is where the grassland bypass project discharges, as well as most of the wetland areas. So there's quite a few discharges there. So it's part of the grassland water district and the grassland bypass project area, which are two of the focuses of our program.
And to what degree do you think that it is reasonably, can we reasonably expect a reduction in salt out of mud and salt sloughs?
Well, and
just in gross terms, you know, because I'm looking at this graph, so it's.
We have already reduced salt loads significantly in this area. There's still a significant discharge. That's a good question, and that's part of our phasing is to figure that out.
Right.
We'll do our best.
I'll just ask you for an opinion up front, Joe. Do you think it's possible to cut it down significantly?
It's not going to be possible to take it all out, no. And the program, you know, continues.
Well, that was my question. Cut it down significantly. Reduce it significantly.
Well, I don't know what significant is. We're going to do our best to reduce it.
You've been trained by an attorney, I could see.
But remember, the real-time management program is to export the salt too. So, let's see. Whoops, I went back. Oops. Oh, I'm having trouble. In summary, the WARF model shows salt loading, and it forecasts opportunities to export salt. The WARF model will continue to improve as we get that good stakeholder data. The WARF manager module provides a water coordinators with modeling tool on a simplified interface. And I think everybody's going to want one, but soon this manager module will be online and it'll be accessible to water coordinators and the public. The visualization tool that we developed is a way that other entities can look at for an example on how to manage data and their salt load. And real-time development is in the phased and early stages. And early participation and collaboration equates to a better management decisions in both our management module and how we operate the program.
Questions, members of the board? Yes, go ahead.
I have a question about the slide that you equated to looking at your GPS, the visual spatial temporal data slide. That's a really neat thing, a really interesting tool. I'm wondering if you know I'm a discharger and I'm looking at a green light there for one of the tributaries or one of the watersheds. Everyone else might be looking at the same way. So what systems do you have in place to make sure not everyone is discharging their salt loads to that green area all at once?
That's a great question. And we're going to discuss that and try to come to terms with that in phase 2 of our real-time management program, which is this next year.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Because that's what happens when you're driving. You see the green light, and everybody goes there, and then it's not green anymore.
Just one comment, Dr. Longley, on that. The one thing that slide showed us, could we go to the one with the, that one there, is that we actually have capacity to discharge more salt up to the red line. That it's important to keep that in mind. Now, certainly there are times when the red line is below, could be, although it really hasn't been since '94, but could be below the allowable. But even though there's some large discharges here, this particular example shows that we're under discharging less load than to meet the objective.
Carl.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
It was interesting, the slide that was just up there, and Jenny went to the GPS slide, and I went to this slide, exactly because of your comment, and to be able to utilize these programs you're working on to maximize export of salt while achieving objectives is pretty remarkable, and we couldn't have done that 10 years ago, I don't think, or maybe even 5 years ago. So I think it's a powerful tool using modern technology to achieve environmental benefits, both for farmers and for the environment at the same time.
And wait till you see the online versions we're developing. I think they're going to be
wait.
very, very impressive.
Any further questions or comments? I have a lot of them on WARM-F based upon previous information I received through CV Salts on this, but I think I'll save them for an offline discussion with both Jeannie and Nigel. And because I'm afraid that we'd be here till 5 o'clock, and my well, then the rest of the stuff to do, my fellow board members won't tolerate that.
I think
so.
Patrick has some questions.
Yes.
Dr. Longley, I think that one of the things that we are presenting, and I don't want to get lost in the details here, but we're certainly working on hammering out a new MAA to govern the next phase of this project. And I think that the more that we develop these information tools, which is the initial phases, and I think that they're progressing quite well, but the closer we come to finalizing those information tools, the next stage beyond phase 2 is to figure out how we're going to actually work to withhold some of that salty water in times when there isn't excess capacity. I mean, I think relying on New Melones to discharge fresh water to dilute salt loads is an inefficient use of limited water. It's certainly constrained and mandated by water rights decisions, so there has to have sufficient quality in that river one way or the other. But if we're going to maximize our water resources, the next stage is actually building some stuff to hold back this water during times when that's what we're looking forward to. So that's the next phase
source
up.
management, just to decrease the load. Thank you very much. And I want to thank you for the presentation. Thank you. I have some interested parties. Ricardo Aranda with Stockton East Water District.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Ricardo Aranda, and I represent the Stockton East Water District. My colleague, Karna Herrickfeld, could not be here today due to her prior commitment, but she prepared a comment letter that I'm here to distribute on her behalf, and I did distribute that letter.
That comment letter should be with you.
Okay. I'd just like to briefly take a quick minute to highlight some of the issues in there. That being said, if there are any comments, Karna would be the best person to ask, and I can take those to her, but I'm really not in a position to address those issues.
Right, go ahead and address the letter itself, though.
Stockton East is vitally interested in the San Joaquin River salinity issues. This interest stems from the water supply contract we have with the Bureau of Reclamation from New Melones Reservoir on the Stanislaus River. Stockton East has been deprived of water due to the Bureau's election to meet the Vernalis salinity objective exclusively from releases of New Melones water for dilution. Since the early 1990s, the Bureau has released in excess of 925,000 acre-feet of water to dilute the saline water caused by the delivery of Central Valley Project water to the west side of the San Joaquin Valley for agricultural and wildlife refuges. The staff report and PowerPoint presentation conclude that the State Water Board mandated that the Bureau to make releases from New Melones Reservoir to meet the objective. That is simply not correct. All Central Valley Project permits are conditioned upon meeting the Vernalis objective, and Reclamation can employ a number of methods to achieve the objective, including providing dilution flows from the Delta Mendota Canal, recirculation of water, acquiring water from other sources, requiring dischargers to provide mitigation flows for their saline discharges, and a number of other controllable factors. The Bureau may employ any one of these identified measures before looking to dilution flows from New Melones. So for the Regional Board staff to conclude that for the next 5 years, Vernalis objectives will be met from releases from New Melones is simply erroneous. Stockton East supports implementation of a real-time management program to achieve the Vernalis salinity objectives. Excuse me. We are an active participant in the Lower San Joaquin River Committee. The most significant concern about the proposed real-time program is the amount of time proposed to achieve full implementation. 5 years is way too long. We respectfully request that you mandate full implementation in a much shorter time period. A more appropriate timetable would be to have full implementation of the real-time management program occur in parallel with the Basin Plan Amendment for the Lower San Joaquin River. Water quality objectives above Vernalis, now slated for December 2015. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to ask Mr. Brownell to comment on that request.
Yes, I think if you look carefully at the slides, you will conclude that staff did not state or believe that we mandate meeting the objectives with new Malonis flows. We did say that the Bureau is choosing to use new Malonis flows to reach the objectives at Vernalis. And it is correct. The control program, and I believe, I shouldn't step into the attorneys, but I believe that Decision 1641 doesn't mandate new Malonis either. It's just they mandate in some way meeting, providing dilution flows to meet the objectives.
Mr. Palooka?
Yeah, both Mr. Brownwell and Mr. Aranda are correct. There may be some imprecise use of the mandate language in the staff report, but essentially what we're trying to do here is wean this part of the valley off of new Malonis as a compliance tool to comply with those SALT objectives. It's certainly within the water rights conditions this is one option. It's certainly not the preferred option, and it's not the option that we want to see happen. And the real-time management is what we want to see replace it.
Right. Thank you very much. I have a card from Dennis Westcott.
No, I have nothing.
Okay, and then there was another card from some individual came in. Oh, David Corey?
Chair Longley, members of the board, David Corey, representing the San Joaquin, let's see, who am I representing today? San Joaquin River Exchange Contractors Authority. Appreciate the presentation. We're actively involved in the West Side Coalition and the development of the real-time program. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the global issues and what we're trying to address here. And I think primarily we're trying to address meeting the water quality objectives at Vernalis. I mean, that's what this control program is about. When you look at what they presented, we've done that for 20 years. So, you know, this is a complicated process of looking at real time, but really we've already been meeting those numbers. Now, I am willing to speak for Karna, even though she's not here, especially because she's not here. But I work with Karna quite a bit, and I understand her concerns. Another concern of hers, and I think a concern of ours as well, is to minimize those dilution flows that are made specifically to meet salinity objectives at Vernalis. I think that is something we need to try and achieve. And in fact, we have done that over the past several years. I think there have been no releases from New Malonis specifically to meet salinity objectives at Vernalis. Now, there are other releases that come out of there for dissolved oxygen in the Stanislaus River, other in-stream flows that certainly help dilution flows, but they're not made because of the Vernalis objective. So when you look at those two goals, we're really meeting them today. Now, are we going to meet them forever? I don't know. That's where this real-time program comes into place so that we continue to meet the Vernalis objective and not rely on New Malonis, you know, minimize that reliance for dilution flows. The other thing I think is important in the real-time program and what we want to do, and I think what Carl, you would also agree with, because I'm willing to speak for you even when you're here, is to maximize salt exports out of the river. Right now, we don't have a drain. CV salts, we're talking about what are we going to do with these salts? Ultimately, where are we going to go with them? One really good place to go is if it's not going to hurt downstream water users, put it in the river and get it out to the ocean. I mean, that is an inexpensive, very viable way to maintain a salt balance in the valley. And when you look at that slide that you pointed out in terms of where mud sloughs, you know, loads were, my question on that slide would be, how could we increase the salt loads going into the river and not whether we need to reduce them? Now, in fact, I think we are going to reduce those loads significantly because of the selenium control program. But from a salt standpoint and salt balance, what we're trying to do is really try and maximize that export of salt without impacting downstream beneficial uses and without impacting New Malonis's water out of, you know, New Malonis water supplies. So I guess my point is, it's a complicated system to try and maximize it, but we've been doing it for 20 years, and certainly over the recent years, I guess 20 years, we have been, in the past, we relied more than we probably should have on New Malonis, but in recent years, we haven't been relying on New Malonis. I think we need to maintain that progress and try and balance those interests, and I think we're making good progress on it, and this is complicated, but really we're achieving it, and I think we're going to continue to achieve it over the next decades.
I have to
would
agree.
just say, I don't think you have been maximizing it. There's all that because of this real-time program, we can see that there is more somewhat of capacity
Right.
to export salts. That may be balanced with what we do or don't release from New Melones, and that's part of the, but you can't you can't address those other issues without the real-time information that this program
Yeah,
generates.
and I think it's important to maximize the salt loads. But we really, recent years, we have not been relying on New Melones for meeting Vernalis objectives. So you want to revise your question to Joe?
Do you have another $25,000?
We've already given, actually.
I know. Any further, for board members, that goes back to an incident that happened a long time ago. Any further questions or comments? Thank you very much for your very eloquent testimony.
Okay, and thank you very much for your interest in this and
Thank you.
keeping up to date. Thank you.
Thank you. With that said, we've gone through the interested parties. Anyone else wish to speak on this item? If not, then we will conclude with this item and looking forward to seeing the updated MAA back in the summer. And thank you for all the good work. So, now we have to make a decision.
So Dr. Longley, I think the next item is extensive. We should probably hold that till after lunch, but Mariposa is not anticipated to take as long. You may want to consider.
Item 25, so we will then go on to item number 25 on the agenda. Mariposa Public Utilities Wastewater Treatment Facility. This is the time and place for hearing to consider renewal of an MPDS permit and adoption of a time schedule order for the Mariposa Wastewater Treatment Facility in Mariposa County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions or wishes to present evidence or testimony on the matter? Seeing that no one is present to contest the matter.
Chair Long, or,
Yes.
we have some late revisions we'd
Oh,
like.
I know.
Okay.
Just a
Okay.
moment. The board
Sure.
will proceed based on the agenda materials and the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
That's me. Yes, we have actually. Chair, yeah, Matt Scroggins, Senior Water Resource Control Engineer from the Fresno office. We have a couple late revisions we'd like to propose. The first is related to a provision in the permit that requires the salinity evaluation and minimization plan, provision 6C3A on page 15, and we're proposing to change the due date from 9 months after adoption of the order to 6 months or 180 days prior to expiration of the order. And the second is the language in the fact sheet, section 4C3C6A. Regarding nitrate, the fact sheet language, support language for our nitrate limit proposed in the permit, we're proposing to remove essentially a sentence along with its associated citation footnote. Remove that from the fact sheet.
Thank you. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No legal issues.
And can I just, sorry, can I get clarification whether or not the Mariposa Public Utility District has gotten the information regarding these late changes?
Yes, we sent them to all the interested
Okay,
the
and there's no
discharger.
objections?
No,
Okay,
they do not.
thank you.
I think what I'm hearing is that Carmen, and I'm certain other board members would like to hear that assurance when these are presented in the future. Thank you. Hearing's now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to renew the MPDS permit and adopt the time schedule order, and this is a voice vote.
I would so move.
Carmen's moved. Do I have a second? Janie seconded. Any discussion? Okay, we'll go to voting. All in favor, state so by saying aye.
Dr. Lund, can I make sure that the motion includes the late revisions?
And my motion includes the late revisions.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I should have so stated. And you, Jenny, do you? Yes, okay. All in favor of the motion state with late revision. State so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Abstentions? Thank you very much. What, do we have anything else that's fast on the calendar?
Donner Summit, I expect to be similar to
Okay.
Mariposa.
This is agenda item 26. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider adoption of a cease and desist order for the Donner Summit wastewater treatment plant in Nevada County. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Seeing no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials and the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
Yes, we have late revisions. My name's Adam Lapitz. I'm with the Central Valley Water Board, Rancho Cordova office, the NPDES program manager. We have one late revision. You should have this for the cease and desist order. It's finding 16. There was a sentence referencing a water code section that does not apply to this facility.
Thank you.
And the discharger has been notified of this change and has no concerns.
Council, or do you have any legal issues to discuss?
No legal issues.
Thank you. The hearing's now closed. I'll entertain a motion with late revisions.
I'll make a motion with late revisions.
And this is to adopt the cease and desist order.
Yes.
Very good. And do I have a second?
Second.
Sandra seconds. This is a roll call vote.
Ms. Ramirez, Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Ms. Miraz, Ms. Moffett, Dr. Longley.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
So Dr. Longley, what I would suggest is on item 27, we do have people here to contest, but I would suggest we open it and let staff do their presentation and possibly continue it after lunch.
Okay, and 28. What's the status of 28?
That one is contested.
Okay.
Oh. Yes? Okay, it's still contested.
Okay, we'll go to 27, and what is the 25? I think is what we have to return to. 24 we will return to after 27. We're taking these out of order.
I apologize, but
Not a problem.
they
You
shouldn't
didn't
take
see the
nearly
time
as long.
schedule today.
The staff.
Item 27 is O'Neill Beverages Company. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider revision of waste discharge requirements and a new cease and desist order for O'Neill Beverage Company's Reedley Winery in Fresno County. Excuse me, my tongue got tied. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Is there anybody here to contest this matter?
Yes, Ms. Kipps happens to be here, Dr. Longley. She's
I have a card from Joanne Kipps, Matthew Towers, Bob Trebek, and Alicia Stumps.
I'm guessing it's possible they thought that we might recess for lunch and then return to
Yes.
their item.
Well, I suggest that we recess, come back into session at 12:30, and proceed.
You're the chair.
I'm the chair, but we don't have people here who were here, and we've been jumping around on the agenda.
It's at your discretion.
That's right. And item 24 is shown as 90 minutes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that has many cards, I'm assuming, as well.
And we've jumped to 27. It would be a logical conclusion that we're not going to get to this for a while. So we will recess for lunch, and we'll be back here at 12:30. In the meantime, if you could notify the parties, if the parties aren't here, we'll then start on agenda item 24 at 12:30. We do not have a closed session today, am I correct?
No closed session.
No closed session.